Welcome to Let's Talk Learning Technology. Do you know the latest in learning technology? Matt and Walter do. From learning authoring tools and animation to virtual reality and everything in between, innovative learning groups Matt Kurtin and Walter Schirmacher geek out on all of it. Get their perspectives on the latest trends, tips and tricks, and recommendations so your learning tech keeps up with the times.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Learning Technology, or as we affectionately refer to it, LT Squared. I'm Walter Schirmacher, one of ILG's programmers.
And I'm Matt Kurtin, ILG Senior Director of Technology and Visual Design.
We have an exciting episode for you today. We're going to be talking about the infrastructure needed to use virtual reality in training.
Joining us in our discussion today is one of ILG's VR developers, Devon Merz. Welcome, Devon.
Hi, everyone.
ILG has worked on several virtual reality projects in the last couple of years. In fact, we just won a Silver Brandon Hall Award for our VR work with one of our pharmaceutical clients. Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about the project?
That project was developed to help operators in a clean room operate properly while developing vaccines. It is sophisticated and it measures things about how the trainees are operating, including if they hold their hands in the right position and how fast they walk. All the kinds of things that need to do to keep the vaccines from getting contaminated.
It sounds like the ability to measure and track what is happening in VR is an important part. But before we dive right into the infrastructure, let's talk some good use cases for VR.
So when you're thinking about whether virtual reality makes sense, you want to think about whether it's something that you could do just as easily in e-learning or you could do with instructor-led training, in which case you wouldn't need VR. Some of the places where you do need VR would be cases where something that you're practicing is too dangerous to practice in real life and you really need to get to that skill level. Cases where you can't afford to fail. So if someone's going to get injured or someone might die if they haven't learned it properly. Other cases might be where it would be expensive to simulate, or like in our case for the aseptic VR training I was just talking about, where it's expensive to take the equipment offline. If the equipment needs to be running almost all the time and taking it offline costs money, then you want to use VR as a way to get up to speed more quickly. Maybe also if you have equipment that's bulky or heavy to move, and in spots where you would benefit from repetition in lots of different scenarios where it would be too complicated to simulate in real life. And then one other use case is where you would benefit from immersion or role play. That feeling of really being there in the experience can be beneficial in VR that you can't get other ways.
Okay, let's say we have a good use case. It seems like one of the first things you would need to determine is which headset you would use.
That's right, because it's important to consider the affordances provided by the pros and cons of different headsets. Devon, I know that you watched the announcement of the Meta Quest Pro that happened recently. What are your thoughts on the advantages that headset will bring?
Definitely, Matt. So with Meta's first installment in the Quest Pro line, they really targeted business and enterprise users. So on the hardware end, this headset's higher price of $1,500 enables top-of-the-line enterprise VR experiences that the $399 base Quest model couldn't provide. So these include much improved graphics, tracking, smoother interactions, and robust processing. Notably, this is the first time that an enterprise-focused headset has had the capability for both traditional virtual reality and for mixed reality, which leverages VR to let you see the physical world with digital items projected onto it. It looks a lot like augmented reality, but leveraging the more mature and business-ready form factor of a VR headset. There's also new important software. Among many other new enterprise apps, Meta's partnership with Microsoft allows for Teams meetings and use of Microsoft's Office tools. All in all, I'm really excited for the potential that this new Quest Pro line can deliver, and I'm excited to use it in some of our upcoming client projects.
So I think that ability to go back and forth between AR and VR on that headset is really interesting, and I like the way that they have the snap-in pieces that let you darken it completely for VR or to let you see through more for AR. And I think that's important because we distinguish really between AR as being beneficial for performance support because you can use it while you're doing your job, and VR being beneficial for training where you're off away from your job learning how to do better when you come back. I think the other thing to think about, you talked a lot about that headset in particular, but when we think about the benefits of one headset versus another, we want to spend enough on that headset to fulfill all the requirements, but not to add extra features or pay for extra features that we don't really need. And I think at that point, it's really important to make the distinction of whether you're picking this headset just for one particular application or whether you're picking this headset for your organization's training that it might be used across other things that you don't even know what those are going to be yet. Then you may need to pick a more powerful headset.
Those are some good points there, Matt and Devon. So how would you go about choosing which headset to use?
Well, I think that what you want to do is you want to get a list of your requirements for sure, because you need to line up against that. And then you need a list of the headsets that are available, and you're trying to pair up there across, here's the set of requirements, here's all the set of headsets we could choose from, what are the options that match, and then which is the best of those matches.
So what development tools would you use for VR?
So there are a lot of choices available depending upon the level of sophistication of whether it needs to be interactive or not. At lower end, there are a number of tools that would be meant for instructional designers that would allow you to look around in a room and to answer multiple choice questions. But as you move up to the higher levels where you need either multiple participants or you need to really be able to interact with equipment and pick things up, the most commonly used tools would be either Unity or Unreal. And I would say if you had to choose between those two, you would want to go back and think about the level of realism you need to achieve, because Unreal has the edge for the highest in graphics, but Unity has the edge if you don't need the utmost in reality and graphics. In terms of built-in support for VR, I think it's ahead of Unreal. And then the next thing I think is if you've got your headset picked out and how you're going to develop it, you really need to think about how are you going to get the builds out to the headsets. And that's where we would focus on app distribution and mobile device management. And there was a Oculus for Business, and it got canceled. And on the roadmap, Meta now has a Meta for Business that's coming, but it's not out yet. So in the meantime, we're using an app distribution system called WebXR, and that allows us to push out builds to all the headsets whenever they connect to Wi-Fi.
Do you think, like in the future, they'll have something similar to like an e-learning store or something where you can actually just go and pick your experience and then it'll just load into your headset? Or do you think that's like way off?
So it's hard to predict exactly what will happen in the future, but one difference for virtual reality versus web-based is that virtual reality at this point is mostly delivered like an app where you need to download the whole thing first and then start to play it, excepting there are cases for WebXR, which is being developed, that would allow you to run smaller things. But for big and complex things, it would be like an application now. And so you might find it in a store and download it from a store, and the face of that store potentially could be a learning management system instead of an app store. I think depending on what manufacturer of headset and what operating system is running, it could work lots of different ways in the future.
That's good to keep in mind. I mean, because sometimes you think about it and it's like, oh, it's virtual reality. Maybe it's similar to e-learning, but it's actually more similar to like an app experience on a phone versus just going to like an e-learning course.
I'd say it's safe to say that in general at this time.
That's good to keep in mind. Okay, so we've talked about picking the headset, and we've talked about developing the VR experience and getting it out to the headset. Let's talk more about tracking and reporting.
So we are tracking in our aseptic VR experience to a learning record store using XAPI. This is an advantage over SCORM, which really isn't intended for tracking outside a learning management system. Devon, you've been heads down with XAPI. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits of XAPI?
Yeah. XAPI is much more flexible than SCORM. It can track any type of action with multiple levels of nuance and granularity. It can also enable deep and detailed data reporting that something like SCORM couldn't provide. Lastly, it's interoperable, so it's gradually being developed to be able to integrate with many of the major learning management systems in the same way a more simple method like SCORM can.
That's a good summary. After we get that data into the learning record store, generally we still need a way to report out on it, because many learning record stores collect the data and store it, but they don't provide reports or dashboards or a graphical view of what's in there. So we are working with the Watershed Learning Analytics platform to generate reports and dashboards from the data we're collecting.
So I know Matt had mentioned Unity and Unreal as two different programs we could use to develop some VR and AR. And I just wanted to get Devon's take.
Yeah, I think historically, before it was used in VR, I think the two programs would be very similar. But now with the large adoption of VR, I think that Unity has put a lot more effort and capabilities into VR development on their platform. So right now I work in and lean toward Unity, but I could see a future where Unreal Engine could add a lot more VR support and really enable and empower its VR users and developers.
Thanks, Matt and Devon. So today we talked about a number of things, including good use cases for VR development, headset selection, development tools, application distribution, and tracking and reporting. So listeners, if you want to learn more about VR infrastructure, we posted some resources at the bottom of this episode's page. If you have any technology topics you'd like us to talk about, you can message Matt or me on Twitter. You can also send us an email at marketing@innovativelg.com.
Thank you all for listening, and tune in to our next episode where we'll be talking about augmented reality for learning.